Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to start our discussion on Chapter 10, and this is going to cover the process of photosynthesis. So, before we jump into the actual process, let's sort of remember who can do this. Talking about that conversation of what is an autotroph versus what is a heterotroph, right? So autotrophs are your producers. These are the organisms in our ecosystems who are capable of producing some organic molecules, typically from carbon dioxide and then some other inorganic molecules. When we look at the context of what we're talking about here with photosynthesis, we're truly talking about photoautotrophs. So organisms who are going to use energy from the sun to be able to make organic molecules from water and carbon dioxide. So we look at photosynthesis as that process, right? The ability to convert that solar energy into chemical energy. And when we look at photoautotrophs in our ecosystems, the first thing that comes to most kids' minds is plants. That being said, they are not the only organisms who are capable of photosynthesis. We've got algae, we've got cyanobacteria, protists, all sorts of organisms who are capable of photosynthesis in some form or another, and a lot of them aren't the plants. Your heterotrophs, on the other hand, these are your consumers. So these are the ones who are going to have to obtain that organic material from the environment, from other organisms, in order to be able to produce their own chemical energy. So they're dependent on those photoautotrophs for food, and if they are organisms who do cellular respiration, then they are also dependent on those photoautotrophs somewhere down the food chain to also produce not only their food, but their oxygen as well. So while plants are not the only things that do photosynthesis, it is what most students are familiar with. So let's look at the major organs in plants that are responsible for that photosynthetic process. And most kids don't think about the fact that plants have organs, but they do. So the vast majority of their photosynthesis, their photosynthetic organ, are their leaves. And their leaves are going to be chock full of cells that are chock full of chloroplasts. And those chloroplasts are the organelles for which those plants are able to perform that photosynthesis. Keep in mind that these chloroplasts are what we believe to be part of that endosymbiotic theory. So their structure is very similar to photosynthetic bacteria, right? So remember we talked about that endosymbiotic theory where one prokaryote ate another, never quite digested it, and they ended up with that symbiotic relationship because that smaller prokaryote was capable of doing functions that the bigger one who ate it couldn't. Um, when we look at those chloroplasts, right, we've got an outer membrane, an inner membrane, and that inner membrane then folds into all of these little disc-like structures. An individual disc is called a thylakoid, and they also have a thylakoid space, so there is literally space in between them. Kind of think of them almost like a pita pocket, right? You can open it up and there's hollow space in the center. And then if you take the entire stack of thylakoids together, we call them a granum. Outside of those thylakoids is a jelly-like substance, similar to the matrix that we would see in the mitochondria, but in this case we call it that stroma. And most of the chlorophyll is going to be responsible for the actual ability to harness that light energy. And that chlorophyll is all very much deeply embedded within those thylakoid membranes. In addition to the chloroplast being a major component of the leaf structure, if we look here, you've got this epidermal layer on either side of your leaf, all right, and then that spongy mesophyll is what's going on here in the center, and that's where the bulk of your chloroplasts are located. But they also have these pores, these stomata, and those are also going to become important as we talk about the leaf and its ability to do photosynthesis in terms of getting the raw materials in and getting rid of the waste products that they produce. So those stomata are surrounded by what we call guard cells. So the sort of tannish color here is the guard cell itself, and then the stomata is the opening, and those guard cells kind of put together. And kind of think of those stomata as your mouth, right? And your ability to take in oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. Well, the plants are going to do the opposite. They need to get in that carbon dioxide and get rid of that oxygen. But just like if you talk all day and don't drink, you get dehydrated, the plants can do the same thing. So they can also lose water through those stomata. And so that's going to become an important component when we get to the very end of this section and talk about different strategies that plants have evolved to be able to conserve their water while still being able to do that gas exchange. So again, we've got those chloroplasts, right? The chlorophyll is bound up in those thylakoid membranes. Again, an entire stack of thylakoids is called a granum, and then they are surrounded by that stroma. So just like it's important to understand where processes from cellular respiration were happening in the cell and in that mitochondria, the same is going to go for what's happening where in our chloroplast and why both of those organelles have the structure that they do in order to perform their function. And a lot of it's going to come back to a lot of this very complex inner folding to be able to increase surface area because guess what? We're going to come across another electron transport chain here in photosynthesis, just like we saw in your mitochondria and cellular respiration. And so having all of those inner folds allows us to be able to maximize that surface area so that we can do that transport most effectively.